Welcome to the Investor Coaching Show. Here's your host, Paul Winkler.
And welcome. This is the Investor Coaching Show. I'm Paul Winkler. Talking money and investing. Ann Swaski joining me today.
Hi.
Hey, there she is.
Been a while.
It has been a while. Not my fault.
I know. I've been traveling a lot.
Traveling.
I have.
And getting educated and all that stuff. So that's what I like. We're all into this education thing around here and like educating you out there as well, because the educated investor, I believe, is a more confident investor. More confident investor is more successful investor. And it's what you don't know that can hurt you. And, you know, we don't know what we don't know, so you don't even know it's going to hurt you. There we go. Let's just take this to the logical conclusion.
Right.
Okay, so, you know, I think this, what we want to start off with is more of a financial planning type of thing, not necessarily investing type of thing.
Right.
Investing related, but.
I don't know. When I come on, I do kind of feel like I like to do a little bit of things targeted at women just because I'm a woman advisor and a lot of my clients.
In a legal background.
Yeah, and a legal background. So although honestly, this really applies to everyone. But.
Well, sure. But the legal background aspect allows you to talk about something at maybe a little deeper level than I would, for sure. Maybe, tongue in cheek. So you gave me a list of things. So I'm just going to choose.
Okay.
So prenups.
Yeah.
There was something that you wanted to talk about regarding that. So did you ever do any of that kind of work?
No, I did not.
That was your securities, mainly securities, and it was, you didn't delve into...
Securities and contracts and variable annuities. And
But of course you had to, this is something that was part of getting your law degree is of course studying these things. So you just didn't apply what you had learned in regards to it. So prenups becoming more common?
Yeah, actually that's what I thought was kind of interesting was prenuptial agreements in the past were really kind of reserved for the rich, the famous, the wealthy. People would tend to want to require them to protect the assets, which there's definitely a good reason they would have thought that.
Well, I don't think it's just the wealthy, though, that need that because of all the second marriages and things like that now.
Well, right. But that's my point is in the past, they were more for wealthy clients or second marriages.
Was it right? Exactly. Okay, I was going to ask was it because of the expense of putting them together, or
I think that's part of it, but also
cultural.
Also, I think it's a cultural thing.
Okay,
which is why I think this is interesting, and I'm bringing it up.
Okay,
is there was a view, and there's still that view out there that they are unromantic. You don't trust me. They're taboo. I'm offended by you asking.
Right. Well,
and
you can see that aspect of it, but I also think of family members that I've known where a spouse passes away, grandma passes away, and then all of a sudden grandpa marries somebody else for companionship, and then grandma gets new grandma number 2, gets everything,
right,
and then passes it on to her family. When grandpa probably that was the last thing on his mind, and he has to depend upon, the goodwill of the new.
Right, and that's a great example of why you might want to consider one in a remarriage situation, especially if you have kids from your earlier marriage that you want to make sure get your assets. And very often the new husband or wife will have their own kids too. So they're going to want their kids to be protected. So, and another reason I'm from Wisconsin, and in Wisconsin and some other states, you have marital property laws. So a prenup will be able to define what is marital and separate property, which can be very important.
Okay, so explain the difference between what's marital versus separate property is going to be if you inherit, let's say, some money.
Separate property is what you brought into the marriage, and or it could be
What
an
you inherited.
inheritance
Yeah, that's
or
where
trust.
I was going. That's where I was going.
And the tricky thing about it is separate property can become marital property by behavior during the marriage.
I can bring in the money I inherited from my dad, and then I put it into a joint account, and then all of a sudden now it's marital
Correct.
property.
So in those kinds of cases, having an agreement is really important. If there's separate property assets, like up in our area, a lot of people have family property,
it's
family
going to be
lake houses or whatever they want to protect.
Okay.
And your example of it passing out of the family because of another marriage, that would be a big problem. But it can be for trusts. It can be for anything.
And what's going through my mind is that you said we can have separate property, which is all well and good while the person's alive. Mm-hmm. And then when that property, let's say, so an example, person inherits money from parents that passed away.
Right.
So person A inherits money from parents who passed away, and person A is living. And if there is a subsequent divorce in some states, Tennessee being one, they can retain those assets because it's separate property. Correct? Am I hitting that? Is that, you see where I'm coming from?
Tennessee is not a marital property state.
But
okay,
but would it not be still the case that if I inherit money and I keep it as separate property in my own name,
yes,
that I would be able to
should
retain that asset?
Yes.
Correct. Okay, so maybe I'm using the wrong terminology.
In most cases, that would be the case.
That'd be most cases. Okay, so with a prenup, what we're talking about is you inherit money from said parents. Person A, again, inherits money, but they pass away, and the beneficiary of their estate is the spouse, person B in our situation, their spouse. And then all of a sudden, now all bets off as to what happens to that money. Because they can pass it to their own family.
It's not just that.
I know it's not just that, but I'm saying, but I am right about that. That's something to be considered. That's one of the reasons for doing this.
Well, if it's separate property, and then it passes to somebody like the spouse, you said, well, then it's not your property anymore. So, yeah.
I get it. So what I'm saying is correct.
Yeah.
Now, if I had some kind of a prenuptial agreement, I don't know that would be the case. Would that be one of those cases where you have a trust that goes into that supports?
Well,
would you have to do it that way?
A prenuptial agreement handles really the disbursement of the funds during the marriage or divorce. And it should work in conjunction with estate planning. It should not be contrary to it, because in your case,
right?
I think you gave in a situation where it was sort of
passed.
Contrary, it went to the wife, but they wanted to keep it separate.
Yeah,
so you want to have them both working together. And honestly, one of my admitted hot buttons as a lawyer are people that try to do this on their own, because that would be an example of a bad result that you could get by not doing it right.
No, I think that's a really good point, because you wouldn't necessarily think about, well, can I do this and will this work in this particular situation?
Right. You have to think of all the contingencies.
Yeah.
And if you just go do some form online, like actually this article, I didn't bring it up, but there's some lady they were quoting who has some online cheap version of prenups. And I would never tell anybody to do that, honestly. She may be the most well-meaning person in the world, but bad things can happen when you try to do things of long-term legal significance yourself. Honestly, I wouldn't do it.
Well, it's just like anything else. You don't know what the things, and if you're in the business of whatever you're in, you've seen every scenario under the sun that can happen, what can go wrong.
Right.
And then you can plan for that. But if you don't have that good of an imagination.
No,
when you're trying to draw up the documents, you're like, oh, I have no idea what this could lead to.
And
so okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say on that point, how things have to work together. as financial advisors,
Sure.
we have to make sure their beneficiary designations match up with what's in their estate planning documents also, or their 401k beneficiaries or whatever. I mean, that's one of the things we need to be talking to people about, because the best estate plan or prenup or whatever in the world is meaningless if you don't implement it.
Well, and sometimes what happens if you have a pre-tax type of an investment vehicle like 401k or an IRA, it may be better to pass that asset through the beneficiary designation to somebody in a lower tax bracket,
Right.
and then take another asset that is, let's say, a non-qualified asset that's going to get a step up in basis, where you don't have taxation up. When you buy, let me explain basis for a second. So I buy a piece of property for $100,000 and it's worth $600,000 when I pass. And, maybe I have, and maybe that piece of property is a stock, let's say, or a stock portfolio, let's say. I wouldn't do an individual stock. So I got this $100,000 and I paid taxes on dividends on $100,000 worth of capital gains and dividends, let's say, throughout the life. So now it's the 100 I paid for it, then 100 that I've already paid taxes on, and it's worth $600,000. Well, that $400,000 gain, you have a step up in basis at death in most cases, where in essence, the new basis is $600,000. So the person that inherits it sells it, and it's gone up to $601,000, let's say, when they sell it. And now their capital gain is $1,000, or their gain is $1,000, whatever that is, probably capital gain. So in essence, you have missed a lot of taxes. Well, for a high tax rate person, that's a really good scenario to inherit an asset like that versus a $600,000 401k that you got to distribute over a period of 10 years, and now you're paying 37% taxes on everything that you're pulling out. You can see where that would be, where you might want to have a difference in who gets what. So that's my point there.
That's right. That's a great point. But that's one thing I can tell you as an attorney. I don't think the attorneys are the best at recognizing those things.
Sure.
So that's where having a financial advisor working with your attorney when you're putting these things together can really help.
And I was actually bolstering your point. I was agreeing with you in my convoluted way.
Yeah.
So that's it. Now, the question for me that I had was, we're talking about prenups. Are they only for the divorce situation, or is there anything in those documents ever that makes it so that if in the event of death that we've agreed that these assets, I wonder, I guess you could get creative and you say, now it goes into a trust, and that trust basically pays out an income to the surviving spouse for a number of years. There are types of trusts that do that,
right?
And in estate planning, you learn about those. And then what happens is you can have the income paid out to the surviving spouse, and then the corpus or the assets in the trust go to the children of the said marriage.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I'm talking like an attorney. The said marriage. Oh, forgive me, Father, if I've sinned. So that's interesting. So we're seeing prenups more often now because of second marriages and those types of things.
Well, but
happening.
also the other thing I thought was interesting about the article is, whereas in the past they were viewed negatively by most people,
as I
honestly.
said, first of all, culturally, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, 46% of couples are describing prenuptials as smart, while another 20% are perceiving them as cynical. So that's that old view. The typically what's happening now is the younger people are having a different attitude about it.
That's funny.
And they think it's good. And honestly, there is some merit to this. Their argument is a solid prenup unifies couples in at least one respect. It encourages communication before marriage about money. And that's true. I mean,
it is true. It gets you talking about
Yeah.
it. It's funny you say that because I remember a sermon years and years ago. A pastor friend of mine, he goes, you remember all my sermons. That's crazy. And I'm like, yeah, I do. Most of them. But, one of the things he said in the sermon, I don't remember what the context was or why this was a topic. But it was talking about contracts. And he says, as Christians, he says, we'd love to be able to do everything on a handshake.
yes.
And he says, the reality of it is you cover yourself because you just don't know. And you have contracts. And he says, I have contracts, and we use those things to make sure. And, if you look at it in biblical terms, you got contracts all over the place,
That's true.
Yeah,
Covenants,
exactly.
refer to
Covenants,
them.
we call them, right?
Yeah.
And so you think about it, it's like, wow, isn't that kind of interesting?
Yeah.
How we will often run with something and go, that's just wrong. You can't do that. It shows a lack of trust. Well, the reality of it is we all kind of have those types of things, and it's age old.
Yeah.
So,
And another great example of where prenups can be really important is if you have a family business. So if you have a family business and you want it to go to the heirs of that family
yeah.
and not pass out of the family.
Sure. Well, I used to do that, and years ago when I would I was a life insurance guy, 30 years ago. But what I would do is I would go, hey, Mr. Jones, you're in business with Mr. Johnson over here. And, if something happens to Mr. Johnson, how do you like his wife? And he'd be like, well, she's all right. I said, you want to be in business with her? And he'd be like, no.
That is the result. And lots of times those heirs don't have really they don't care about the business. They've gotten a stream of income from it.
Sure.
And they like that, but they have no training in it, no concern. They don't.
Yeah, you don't want to be in business with them.
Yeah.
So in that particular case, what I'm talking about, folks, is what's called a buy-sell agreement. So what you have an agreement that you will sell. There's going to be a forced sale to the other partner. Let's say if it's a partnership. In the event of death, so that hence you will not be partners with the other person's family, the deceased person's family that you may like, but may realize that they don't know anything about the business. They're not going to add any value to the business. So
Right.
Lots of reasons to do this type of legal planning, and that is, that's good stuff.